Looking back now, Tom realizes how blind he had been to all the warning signs. His life with Michelle seemed picture perfect on the surface, the kind of relationship that made their friends joke about couple goals and share knowing smiles at dinner parties. Their home in the peaceful suburbs of Boston was always spotless, decorated with photos from their travels and memories they'd built over 8 years of marriage. Tom worked as a software developer, while Michelle had carved out a successful career in corporate marketing. They hosted weekend barbecues in their backyard, went on regular date nights, and seemed to have mastered the art of balancing work and personal life. Their friends often commented on how well they communicated, how in sync they appeared to be. But somewhere along the way, small inconsistencies began creeping into their daily life. At first, they were so subtle that Tom barely noticed them. Like the time he mentioned to his best friend about the weekend plans he and Michelle had discussed, a hiking trip they'd been planning for weeks. His friend looked confused, saying Michelle had told everyone they couldn't make it to any weekend plans because Tom was swamped with work deadlines. Tom brushed it off as a simple misunderstanding. After all, everyone gets their wires crossed sometimes, right? But then similar incidents started happening more frequently. During a video call with his parents, he brought up the new project he'd been excited about at work, something he'd been sharing with Michelle over dinner for the past month. His mother's concerned expression made him pause. According to Michelle, he'd never mentioned any new project. These moments left Tom feeling slightly off balance, like walking upstairs in the dark and finding there's one more step than you remembered. He started paying more attention to their conversations, trying to pin down why his recollections seemed to differ from what Michelle claimed he'd said. Their home security system recorded every time someone entered or left the house, a feature Michelle had insisted on installing for safety. She kept meticulous records of their schedules, their social plans, even their conversations, all in a neat digital calendar she'd created to keep their busy lives organized. At the time, Tom had appreciated her attention to detail. Now, he wasn't so sure. During dinner with their neighbors one evening, Tom mentioned their plans to renovate their kitchen that summer. He distinctly remembered discussing color schemes and cabinet styles with Michelle just the previous week. But before he could continue, Michelle let out a gentle laugh, the kind that made everyone else at the table smile sympathetically. "Honey," she said, touching his hand with concern, "we never talked about renovating the kitchen. You must be thinking about Lisa and Mike's renovation plans." The way she said it, so soft, so caring, made Tom doubt himself. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he had mixed up conversations, but something in his gut told him otherwise. The strange thing was, whenever he tried to bring up these discrepancies privately with Michelle, she would show him their shared calendar, their text messages, or their email exchanges, and somehow they never seemed to match his memories. Friends started giving him odd looks when he mentioned past conversations or plans. They'd glance at Michelle, who would shake her head slightly with that same concerned expression. "Remember what Dr. Richards said about stress affecting memory?" she would say gently, referencing a doctor's appointment Tom had no recollection of attending. Tom began keeping his own private notes about their conversations, not quite sure why he felt the need to do so. He still loved Michelle deeply, but something had shifted in their relationship, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Like a photo that's ever so slightly out of focus, their perfect life had begun to show signs of distortion. As autumn approached and leaves started changing color outside their beautifully maintained home, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He just didn't know what he was missing. Not yet. What he did know was that the woman he'd married, the life they'd built together, and the reality he experienced seemed to be increasingly at odds with each other. Little did he know, the perfect facade was about to crack, revealing a truth more disturbing than anything he could have imagined. The day everything started falling apart was surprisingly ordinary. Tom's parents had driven up from Connecticut for their monthly family dinner, a tradition they'd maintained since he and Michelle first got married. The autumn air was crisp, and Michelle had prepared her signature pot roast, filling their home with warm, inviting aromas. Tom was excited to share his news. For weeks, he'd been in talks with his company about leading a new development team. He'd discussed every meeting, every detail with Michelle over their evening meals. The position would mean more responsibility, better pay, and the career growth he'd been working toward for years. As they settled around the dining table, Tom's father asked about work. Actually, Tom said, smiling, I've got some great news. Remember that team lead position I've been telling you about? They're officially offering it to me next week. The silence that followed felt heavy, uncomfortable. His mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and his father's brow furrowed in confusion. Michelle's face showed a mixture of concern and embarrassment that made Tom's stomach twist. Sweetheart, Michelle said softly, placing her hand over his, this is the first any of us are hearing about a promotion. Are you feeling okay? She turned to his parents, her voice gentle but worried. He's been under a lot of stress lately. Tom felt like he'd been doused with cold water. What? No, I've been telling you about this for weeks. The meetings with Bob, the project planning sessions. His voice trailed off as Michelle shook her head slowly. Tom, honey, you haven't mentioned anything about a promotion. You've been working from home most days, remember? In fact, you missed 2 days of work last week because you weren't feeling well. His parents exchanged concerned glances. Tom pulled out his phone, scrolling through his calendar. But where he expected to find meetings and notes, he found blank spaces and sick days he didn't remember taking. That dinner marked the beginning of what felt like living in 2 different realities. The next week, during a video call with his college friend Chris, Tom mentioned the weekend camping trip he and Michelle had planned for next month. Chris looked puzzled. But Michelle told me you guys couldn't make it to my birthday camping weekend because you've been having trouble sleeping outdoors lately. Tom had no recollection of this conversation, nor any issues with camping. He'd always loved it. But when he brought it up with Michelle later, she pulled up their text messages with Chris, showing a detailed exchange he didn't remember, declining the invitation due to his supposed camping anxiety. The incidents multiplied. At a neighborhood block party, Tom talked about the cooking classes he and Michelle had been taking together. Their neighbor Beth looked at him strangely, saying Michelle had mentioned he'd stopped going after the first class because he felt overwhelmed. Tom clearly remembered attending 4 classes, mastering a perfect risotto just last week. Each time he tried to assert his version of events, Michelle would produce evidence to the contrary: text messages, emails, calendar entries, even photos. But something felt off about all of it. The evidence was always perfect, too perfect, like a story without any loose ends. His friends started treating him differently. They'd exchange quick glances with Michelle when he spoke, their faces showing a mix of pity and concern. Some began calling Michelle directly to make plans, bypassing him altogether. One evening, while watching TV, Michelle casually mentioned that she'd scheduled another appointment with Dr. Richards, the memory specialist. She clarified when she saw his confused expression. We've been seeing him for the past month, remember? Tom felt his heart rate increase. He had no memory of any doctor's appointments, any memory specialist, or any discussions about seeing one. But when Michelle showed him the calendar entries, the doctor's business card, and even receipts from previous visits, he felt his grip on reality slipping. He started keeping a small notebook hidden in his desk drawer at work, jotting down conversations, events, and plans as they happened. Something wasn't adding up, but every time he tried to put the pieces together, Michelle's evidence would contradict his memories, making him question everything he thought he knew. The confident, successful software developer was slowly being replaced by someone who second-guessed every memory, every conversation, every experience. His coworkers noticed the change, the way he'd double and triple check every email, how he'd hesitate before speaking in meetings, constantly looking to others for confirmation. As winter approached, Tom felt like he was walking on increasingly thin ice, never sure when it might crack beneath his feet. But amid his growing uncertainty, a small voice in the back of his mind kept whispering that something wasn't right, and it wasn't his memory that was the problem. Winter had settled over Boston, bringing with it short days and long shadows. Tom sat in yet another waiting room, this time at a neurologist's office, while Michelle spoke quietly with the receptionist. This was the 4th specialist he'd seen in 2 months. Each visit felt like another brick in the wall that was slowly surrounding him, cutting him off from the life he thought he knew. Michelle had started carrying a small blue notebook everywhere they went. For documenting episodes, she'd explain to their friends, family, and doctors. She would write in it constantly, her pen scratching against the paper whenever Tom spoke about past events or plans they'd made. The sound of that pen had become like nails on a chalkboard to him. During dinner with his brother Pete last week, Tom had mentioned their mom's birthday gift, a handmade quilt they'd picked up together at the craft fair. Michelle's pen had immediately appeared, and Pete's face had crumpled with worry. "Tom," he'd said gently, "Mom's birthday isn't for another 3 months, and there hasn't been a craft fair in town since last summer." The next day, Michelle had shown the neurologist her notebook entries, patient confused about dates, fabricating memories of events that haven't occurred, becoming defensive when corrected. The doctor had nodded gravely, adding notes to Tom's increasingly thick medical file. At work, things were getting worse. His team lead position, the one he swore he'd been promised, had gone to someone else. His boss had called him in for a meeting, expressing concern about his recent behavior. Apparently, Michelle had called HR to inform them about his condition, suggesting he might need to take medical leave. "We care about you, Tom," his boss had said, sliding a pamphlet for the company's mental health services across the desk. "Take all the time you need to get better." Tom had stayed at the pamphlet, his vision blurring. He didn't need to get better. He needed someone to believe him. But the evidence against his version of reality kept mounting. Michelle had installed a home security system that tracked their comings and goings. She showed the doctor's logs proving Tom had been home on days he thought he'd been at work. She had screenshots of text messages he didn't remember sending, emails he didn't recall writing. Their friends had started treating their home like a hospital room, speaking in hushed voices and giving Tom those pitying looks that make his skin crawl. Michelle had joined several online support groups for partners of people with memory issues, and their neighbors brought over casseroles as if someone had died. One evening, while trying to make sense of it all, Tom had attempted to log into their shared cloud storage to look at old photos, proof of the life he remembered. But the password had been changed. "For your own protection," Michelle had explained. "Dr. Richards thinks it's best if we manage your digital access for now. You've been getting confused about old photos lately." The worst part wasn't the doctors or the tests or even the medication they'd started him on. It was the way Michelle would look at him, with such perfectly crafted concern, such practiced patience. She placed notes around the house reminding him of reality, sticky notes with dates, schedules, and doctor's appointments. She'd installed a GPS tracking app on his phone in case he got confused and wandered off. Tom found himself whispering to his reflection in the bathroom mirror, reciting memories like prayers. The cooking classes were real. We made risotto. The teen lead position was real. I had meetings with Bob. But with each passing day, his certainty wavered a little more. His parents had given Michelle power of attorney over his medical decisions. His credit cards had been deactivated for his safety. His friends now called Michelle first before inviting him anywhere. His world had shrunk to the size of that house, with Michelle as his keeper and interpreter of reality. But something deep inside Tom was starting to shift. The fog of self-doubt was occasionally pierced by moments of startling clarity. He noticed how Michelle always had evidence ready before he even finished speaking, how she seemed to anticipate his memories before he shared them, how every contradiction was perfectly documented, every alternative reality meticulously supported. As he sat in that neurologist's waiting room, watching Michelle chat with the receptionist, Tom felt a strange calm settle over him. Maybe he wasn't the one who needed all these doctors. Maybe the real sickness wasn't in his mind at all. But he'd need proof, real proof, before anyone would believe him over Michelle's perfectly crafted narrative. Little did he know that proof was hiding in plain sight, waiting to be discovered in the very home where his reality had been so carefully unraveled. Winter had settled over Boston, bringing with it short days and long shadows. Tom sat in yet another waiting room, this time at a neurologist's office, while Michelle spoke quietly with the receptionist. This was the 4th specialist he'd seen in 2 months. Each visit felt like another brick in the wall that was slowly surrounding him, cutting him off from the life he thought he knew. Michelle had started carrying a small blue notebook everywhere they went. For documenting episodes, she'd explain to their friends, family, and doctors. She would write in it constantly, her pen scratching against the paper whenever Tom spoke about past events or plans they'd made. The sound of that pen had become like nails on a chalkboard to him. During dinner with his brother Pete last week, Tom had mentioned their mom's birthday gift, a handmade quilt they'd picked out together at the craft fair. Michelle's pen had immediately appeared, and Pete's face had crumpled with worry. "Tom," he'd said gently, "Mom's birthday isn't for another 3 months, and there hasn't been a craft fair in town since last summer." The next day, Michelle had shown the neurologist her notebook entries, patient confused about dates, fabricating memories of events that haven't occurred, becoming defensive when corrected. The doctor had nodded gravely, adding notes to Tom's increasingly thick medical file. At work, things were getting worse. His team lead position, the one he swore he'd been promised, had gone to someone else. His boss had called him in for a meeting, expressing concern about his recent behavior. Apparently, Michelle had called HR to inform them about his condition, suggesting he might need to take medical leave. "We care about you, Tom," his boss had said, sliding a pamphlet for the company's mental health services across the desk. "Take all the time you need to get better." Tom had stared at the pamphlet, his vision blurring. He didn't need to get better. He needed someone to believe him. But the evidence against his version of reality kept mounting. Michelle had installed a home security system that tracked their comings and goings. She showed the doctor's logs proving Tom had been home on days he thought he'd been at work. She had screenshots of text messages he didn't remember sending, emails he didn't recall writing. Their friends had started treating their home like a hospital room, speaking in hushed voices and giving Tom those pitying looks that made his skin crawl. Michelle had joined several online support groups for partners of people with memory issues, and their neighbors brought over casseroles as if someone had died. One evening, while trying to make sense of it all, Tom had attempted to log into their shared cloud storage to look at old photos, proof of the life he remembered. But the password had been changed. "For your own protection," Michelle had explained. "Dr. Richards thinks it's best if we manage your digital access for now. You've been getting confused about old photos lately." The worst part wasn't the doctors or the tests or even the medication they'd started him on. It was the way Michelle would look at him, with such perfectly crafted concern, such practiced patience. She'd placed notes around the house reminding him of reality, sticky notes with dates, schedules, and doctor's appointments. She'd installed a GPS tracking app on his phone in case he got confused and wandered off. Tom found himself whispering to his reflection in the bathroom mirror, reciting memories like prayers. The cooking classes were real. We made risotto. The team lead position was real. I had meetings with Bob. But with each passing day, his certainty wavered a little more. His parents had given Michelle power of attorney over his medical decisions. His credit cards had been deactivated for his safety. His friends now called Michelle first before inviting him anywhere. His world had shrunk to the size of their house, with Michelle as his keeper and interpreter of reality. But something deep inside Tom was starting to shift. The fog of self-doubt was occasionally pierced by moments of startling clarity. He noticed how Michelle always had evidence ready before he even finished speaking, how she seemed to anticipate his memories before he shared them, how every contradiction was perfectly documented, every alternative reality meticulously supported. As he sat in that neurologist's waiting room, watching Michelle chat with the receptionist, Tom felt a strange calm settle over him. Maybe he wasn't the one who needed all these doctors. Maybe the real sickness wasn't in his mind at all. But he'd need proof, real proof, before anyone would believe him over Michelle's perfectly crafted narrative. Little did he know that proof was hiding in plain sight, waiting to be discovered in the very home where his reality had been so carefully unraveled. The truth came out on a Sunday morning, of all times. Michelle was at her weekly yoga class, one of the few routines that hadn't changed since Tom's condition began. He'd been using these precious moments alone to slowly piece together his fragmented reality, searching for something, anything that would prove his memories weren't just delusions. That morning, while organizing their home office, Tom noticed something odd about the bottom drawer of Michelle's filing cabinet. The drawer that was supposedly jammed and had been for months. He'd always respected Michelle's privacy, but something about the way she'd casually mentioned the drawer being broken, right when he'd wanted to store some old work documents there, now seemed suspicious. After 15 minutes of careful manipulation, the drawer slid open with a soft click. Inside, beneath a layer of old tax returns, he found a red folder he'd never seen before. His hands trembled as he opened it. The first page was a printout of his work email inbox, but not as he remembered it. Emails he was certain he'd sent about the team lead position had been deleted. The dates on other emails had been changed. There were screenshots showing how to alter email metadata, how to edit message histories. His heart pounding, Tom dug deeper. He found a notebook, not the blue one Michelle carried to doctor's appointments, but a black leather journal filled with her neat handwriting. It contained detailed plans, schedules, and scripts. Each entry was meticulously dated, going back months before his supposed memory issues began. January 15, told his parents he never mentioned the promotion. Delete relevant emails tonight. Update calendar entries. Remember to show concern, not frustration. February 3, camping trip discussion with Chris went perfectly. Tom completely confused. Remember to maintain worried expression when he brings it up again. March 20, Dr. Richards' appointment prep. Key points: increasing confusion, fabricated memories, resistant to help. Bring up sleeping issues and work absences. Tom felt his stomach lurch. Everything was there, every contradiction, every confused moment, every time he'd questioned his own memory, all carefully planned and orchestrated. She'd even kept records of which friends she'd enlisted to help, convincing them they were protecting Tom from himself. Behind the journal, he found a USB drive. His hands shaking so badly he could barely plug it into his laptop, Tom discovered folders full of edited photos, manipulated text message screenshots, and doctored security camera footage. She'd created an entire false timeline of his life, erasing and rewriting his reality piece by piece. There were tutorials on gaslighting techniques, documents about psychological manipulation, and notes on how to convince medical professionals that someone was losing their grip on reality. She'd studied it all, planned it all, executed it all with frightening precision. But what hit him hardest was finding his original cell phone, the one Michelle had insisted he'd lost during an episode 2 months ago. It still contained all his original text messages, emails, and photos. All the proof of his real memories, his real life, was right there in his hands. Sitting on the office floor, surrounded by evidence of his wife's elaborate deception, Tom felt something break inside him. But it wasn't his sanity, it was the fog of self-doubt that had been suffocating him for months. Every doctor's appointment, every concerned friend, every sympathetic nod from his family, it had all been part of Michelle's carefully constructed illusion. He found documents showing she'd begun transferring their joint assets to private accounts months ago. There were consultation records with divorce attorneys, all while she was supposedly taking him to memory specialists. She'd been building a case to have him declared mentally incompetent, planning to take everything while making herself look like the devoted, suffering wife. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped Tom back to reality. Michelle was home early. With shaking hands, he quickly photographed as many documents as he could with his work phone, the one she didn't have access to. He carefully returned everything to the drawer, making sure it looked untouched. As he heard her key in the lock, Tom made a decision. For the first time in months, he knew exactly what was real and what wasn't, but he also knew he couldn't let Michelle realize what he'd discovered. Not yet, not until he had a plan. Walking downstairs to greet his wife, Tom gave the performance of his life, playing the confused, dependent husband she'd worked so hard to create. But behind his seemingly vacant smile, his mind was racing. He now had proof of everything, and he knew exactly what he needed to do next. The woman who had almost convinced him he was losing his mind had no idea that her perfectly constructed house of lies was about to come crashing down. But this time, Tom would be the one controlling the narrative. For the next 2 weeks, Tom lived a double life. On the surface, he remained the confused, dependent husband Michelle had crafted. But behind this carefully maintained facade, he was meticulously building his case, piece by piece. His first step was finding a lawyer, but he had to be careful. Michelle monitored his phone, his computer, and their bank accounts. During his lunch breaks at work, Tom would use the public library's computers, researching attorneys who specialized in cases involving psychological manipulation. He couldn't risk using his work computer. He discovered Michelle had convinced his department to install monitoring software for his safety. The breakthrough came when he found Linda Chen, a lawyer who'd handled similar cases. During their first meeting, Tom spread out the photos he'd taken of Michelle's hidden documents. Linda didn't show pity or doubt. Instead, she showed understanding and determination. "This is more common than you'd think," she said, examining the evidence. "And you've done exactly the right thing by documenting everything." Tom had started carrying a small voice recorder, not his phone, which Michelle could track, but an old-fashioned device he bought with cash. He recorded their conversations, capturing the subtle ways she twisted his words, the careful manipulation hidden beneath her concerned tone. Each recording was immediately backed up to a secure cloud account Linda had helped him create. He discovered more disturbing details as he dug deeper. Michelle had been in contact with his company's HR department for months before his symptoms began, laying groundwork for a potential disability claim. She'd joined online support groups for spouses of mentally ill partners long before he'd shown any signs of confusion. Everything had been planned, timed, and executed with frightening precision. Using his work phone, Tom secretly photographed pages from Michelle's blue notebook, the one she used to document his episodes. Comparing these with her hidden journal revealed how she'd crafted her lies, twisting real events into evidence of his supposed mental decline. But the most shocking discovery came when Tom managed to access their home security system's backup files. Michelle had edited the primary footage, but she'd missed the automatic cloud backups. The original recordings showed him leaving for work on days she claimed he'd been home confused. They showed him attending those cooking classes she said he'd quit. Every episode she'd documented was contradicted by the original footage. Tom started reaching out to friends, carefully choosing who to trust. His old college roommate, Rick, was the first. "I knew something felt off," Rick said after Tom showed him the evidence. But Michelle was so convincing, and she had all those documents. More friends followed, each reaction a mix of horror at Michelle's deception and guilt at their own unwitting participation. The hardest part was approaching his family. Tom arranged to meet his brother Pete for lunch, away from Michelle's watchful eye. As Pete reviewed the evidence, his face went pale. "She came to me months ago," he admitted, voice shaking. "Said you were having episodes, that we needed to support her in getting you help." I thought, "God, Tom, I'm so sorry." Tom worked with Linda to document how Michelle had systematically isolated him. She'd convinced his friends to report back to her about his behavior. She'd manipulated his family into supporting her version of events. She'd even found ways to access his medical records, building a false history of mental health issues. The more they uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Michelle had done this before. Linda's investigation revealed 2 previous relationships where she'd exhibited similar behavior, though never to this extent. Both men had eventually moved away, their reputations and relationships in tatters. Working late one evening at Linda's office, Tom found financial records showing Michelle had been siphoning money from their joint accounts into offshore holdings. She'd been planning this endgame for years, building toward a future where she'd have everything: their house, their savings, even his pension, while he'd be left with nothing but a fabricated history of mental illness. Tom maintained his act at home, playing the role of the declining husband perfectly. He attended therapy sessions, took the prescribed medications, though he didn't actually swallow them, and continued to act confused and dependent, all while gathering evidence, building his case, and preparing for the moment when he'd finally reveal the truth. Each night, as he lay next to the woman who'd almost destroyed his life, Tom would silently rehearse Linda's words. "The key is patience. Build the case. Document everything. When we move, we only get one chance to get this right." As winter turned to spring, Tom knew they were almost ready. The evidence was overwhelming, the documentation complete. Soon, very soon, Michelle would learn that her greatest victim had become her worst nightmare, someone who knew the truth and could prove it. The day of the confrontation arrived on a bright spring morning. Tom had chosen this day carefully. It was when Michelle usually had her weekly yoga class, giving him time to set everything up. He'd arranged for Linda, his lawyer, to arrive at 11:30, just as Michelle would be returning home. His parents and brother would arrive shortly after, along with 2 police officers Linda had coordinated with. That morning, Michelle had been particularly sweet, making his favorite breakfast and reminding him about his medication. Tom pretended to take the pills while she watched, using the trick he perfected over the past weeks. As she left for yoga, she kissed his forehead, reminding him to stay safe and call if he got confused. The moment her car disappeared down the street, Tom sprang into action. He and Rick, his college roommate, began setting up the living room. They connected a laptop to the TV screen, creating a makeshift presentation area. On the dining room table, they laid out copies of documents in careful order: Michelle's hidden journal, the doctored medical records, the manipulated photos, and the bank statements showing transferred funds. The security camera footage played silently on the TV screen, showing clip after clip that contradicted Michelle's carefully crafted narrative. Tom's original phone sat charging nearby, ready to provide its evidence. Everything was labeled, organized, and impossible to deny. At exactly 11:25, Linda arrived, carrying her briefcase. She reviewed the setup with Tom one final time. "Remember," she said, squeezing his shoulder, "let me do most of the talking. Stay calm, no matter what she says or does." When Michelle's car pulled into the driveway at 11:40, Tom's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. She walked in, still in her yoga clothes, and froze at the sight of Linda sitting in their living room. "Tom?" Michelle's voice carried that familiar note of concern. "Honey, what's going on? Who is this?" She moved toward him, reaching for her blue notebook, her weapon of choice for documenting his episodes. "Please sit down, Mrs. Wilson," Linda said firmly. "My name is Linda Chen, and I'm your husband's attorney." The change in Michelle's expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of fear quickly masked by confusion and worry. "Attorney? Tom, you're not well enough to be making these kinds of decisions. Let me call Dr. Richards." "The real Dr. Richards," Tom said quietly, "the one at the actual clinic, has never met me." We checked. He pressed play on the laptop, and Michelle's own voice filled the room. A recorded phone call with a friend, discussing how to fake medical records. The front door opened, and Tom's parents and brother walked in, followed by the police officers. Michelle's face went pale. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice had lost its usual confidence. "Tom's been having episodes. He's confused. I have documentation." "Yes," Linda interrupted, "you certainly do have documentation." She began laying out papers from her briefcase, copies of Michelle's hidden journal, showing her detailed plans for gaslighting Tom. "Would you like to explain these?" For the next hour, Linda methodically presented the evidence. The unedited security footage showing Tom at work when Michelle claimed he was home having episodes. The bank records showing systematic theft. The documentation of her previous victims. Through it all, Tom watched the mask of loving concern crumble from his wife's face, replaced by something cold and hard. Michelle tried every trick she'd perfected. She cried. She claimed Tom was having a breakdown. She tried to convince his parents that this was just another episode. But with each attempt, Linda countered with hard evidence, recordings, documents. The breaking point came when Linda played a series of video clips showing Michelle editing footage, changing dates on emails, and coaching friends on what to say about Tom's condition. The Michelle in these videos was different from the caring wife she pretended to be. She was calculated, cold, precise in her manipulation. "Why?" Tom finally asked, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Was it just about the money, or did you enjoy watching me doubt myself?" Michelle's response was chilling in its simplicity. "You were too trusting," she said, her caring facade completely gone. "Too easy to manipulate. I thought you'd break faster, actually." The police officers stepped forward then, presenting a warrant. Beyond the fraud and financial crimes, they were investigating her previous relationships, looking for similar patterns of abuse. As Michelle was led away, she turned back once, meeting Tom's eyes. For the first time, he saw her clearly, not as the loving wife he thought he knew, but as the manipulator she truly was. And in that moment, he felt not just anger or hurt, but pity for someone who could craft such elaborate deceptions, yet never know real connection. His parents hugged him, tears streaming down their faces as they apologized for believing Michelle's lies. His brother couldn't stop saying how sorry he was. But Tom felt only relief that the truth was finally out, that his reality was no longer something someone else could twist and reshape at will. 1 year had passed since the day Michelle was led away by police officers. Tom sat in his new apartment, surrounded by morning sunlight, reading an email from Linda. The case was finally over. Michelle had accepted a plea deal, facing consequences for her actions, while agreeing to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment. The healing process hadn't been easy. Some nights, Tom still woke up reaching for his phone to record conversations, a habit born from months of needing to prove his reality. But those moments were becoming rarer. His new therapist, Dr. Amy Thompson, a real one this time, thoroughly vetted by Linda, had helped him understand that such reactions were normal after experiencing prolonged psychological manipulation. Recovery isn't linear, she told him during one of their sessions. Some days you'll feel strong, others you'll question everything. Both are part of healing. Her words had become a mantra of sorts, helping him through the darker moments. The support group he joined had been a revelation. Listening to others share similar stories made him realize he wasn't alone. There was Bill, whose business partner had gaslighted him for years about company finances. Karen, whose mother had manipulated her entire family through elaborate lies. Each story different, yet connected by the common thread of having their reality twisted by someone they trusted. Tom had started sharing his story too, first in the support group, then in a blog that had gained unexpected attention. People reached out to him daily, sharing their experiences or asking for advice. He'd become an advocate almost by accident, speaking at awareness events about psychological manipulation and the importance of trusting one's instincts. His relationship with his family had grown stronger through the healing process. His parents had thrown themselves into learning about gaslighting and psychological abuse, determined to never miss the signs again. His brother Pete had become his strongest supporter, checking in regularly and helping Tom rebuild his confidence in his own memories and judgments. Work had improved dramatically. Once his boss understood the full story, Tom was offered the team lead position he'd originally been promised. His colleagues, who'd been unwittingly drawn into Michelle's web of lies, had apologized profusely. Many had become close friends, bonding over lunch breaks where they could now talk freely without fear of their words being twisted and reported back to Michelle. The hardest part had been learning to trust again. When Lisa from accounting had asked him out for coffee 6 months ago, his first instinct had been panic. But Dr. Thompson had helped him understand that being cautious didn't mean he had to be alone. He and Lisa were taking things slowly, building a friendship first, with honest communication as their foundation. Tom had also discovered something unexpected, a talent for helping others spot the warning signs he'd missed. He'd worked with Linda to create a workshop for HR professionals about recognizing workplace manipulation. The program had been picked up by several companies, helping others avoid similar situations. His old phone, the one that had provided crucial evidence, sat in a drawer now, no longer needed but kept as a reminder. Not of the manipulation, but of the moment he'd discovered his strength, when he'd chosen to fight back instead of doubting himself. The financial wounds were healing too. The court had ordered Michelle to repay what she'd stolen, and Tom had learned valuable lessons about maintaining financial independence, even in trusted relationships. He'd started teaching a monthly class at the community center about financial safety and the importance of keeping personal records. Today, sitting in his sunlit apartment, Tom felt peace settling over him. The morning news had carried a story about new laws being proposed to address psychological abuse, laws that his case had helped inspire. His blog post about healing had received comments from readers worldwide, each sharing their journey toward reclaiming their truth. He opened his journal, not to document evidence anymore, but to reflect on his growth. 1 year later, he wrote, "And I finally understand that surviving manipulation didn't make me weaker. It made me stronger, wiser, and more connected to myself and others." His phone buzzed with a text from Rick, asking if he was still up for their weekly basketball game. Another from his mom about Sunday dinner. A reminder about tomorrow's support group meeting, where he'd be sharing his story with new members. These simple, honest interactions, once taken for granted, now felt like precious gems, each one a testament to real relationships built on trust and truth. As Tom got ready to leave for work, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The confused, doubting man from a year ago was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, someone who knew his truth and could help others find theirs. The scars of manipulation hadn't disappeared, but they'd become markers of survival, reminding him that even the most carefully constructed lies couldn't stand against the power of truth and resilience.